Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Racing Lanes podcast. We're running a tad bit behind this evening. We are trying to get our guest, trying to get him situated. We're having a little bit of a technical issue on his end. So we're trying to work out and get him up and on board, get his issue cleared out. But until we do that, the show must go on as always. And so this week, let me see, I'm going to share my screen here just for a second and pull up this week's DAT's trend lines report. Give me 1 second here. Let me share my screen. You know what? I think that we have.
There you go.
I think that we have Jeff on board.
Oh, wonderful. Jeff, are you there?
I am here, guys. I apologize.
Yep. All
No,
right.
no problem. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm sorry, man.
So we're going to jump really quickly. Let me jump into get this report done real quickly, and we'll get Jeff and everybody back on board. So this week's DAT trend lines report, as we can see this week, the main thing that everyone is always concerned about and talking about is the price of diesel fuel. Diesel fuel prices have continually been going up, and this week is no change. Has went up by 2.8 percentage points. We're showing that the national average diesel fuel price checks in at $5.70 per gallon. Drive-in spot rates hold their ground in a short work week. So we've been anxiously waiting for the seasonal correction in the recent decline in spot rates, and it may have finally arrived. Produce and grilling season typically provide a boost in demand between now and July 4th, driving up the line haul spot rates by as much as 30 cents per mile in recent years, but not this year. Produce volumes are down 16% compared to this time last year, or the equivalent of almost 30,000 fewer weekly truckloads of fruits and vegetables, which definitely can have an effect on you if you're working that spot market. So let's check and see how the rates have been performing on each segment type, starting out with dry vans. And as we can see, starting out up in that upper northeastern corridor, we're showing an average outbound rate for dry vans at $2.46. Dropping down to the mid-Atlantic and southeastern states, we're showing that average outbound spot market rate for dry vans is at $2.80 per mile. Moving up into the Midwest, that average checks in at $2.83 per mile. Dropping down to that south central region, we're showing the average outbound rate at $2.75. Wrapping up, coming out of the West Coast, that average outbound spot market rate comes in at $2.60. Shifting gears, jumping over to the flatbed rates, coming up out of that upper northeastern corridor, we're showing that the average flatbed rate checks in at $3.32 per mile. Moving down to that mid-Atlantic and southeastern states, once again, the outbound spot market rate for flatbeds checks in at $3.73. Moving up into the Midwest, the average outbound spot market rate for flatbeds is at $3.64. Wrapping up, not wrapping up, but coming out of the South Central region, that average outbound rate for flatbeds is at $3.46. Wrapping up, coming out of the West Coast, the average outbound rate checks in at $2.98 per mile. Shifting gears, wrapping up the trend lines report for the temperature controlled or reefer portion of the report, the average outbound spot market rate out of the Northeast checks in at $2.66. Coming out of the mid-Atlantic and southeastern states, average outbound rate shows at $3.09. Coming out of the Midwest, average outbound spot market rate is at $3.20. Coming in out of the South Central region, that average outbound rate checks in at $3.19. And wrapping up, coming out of the West Coast, that average outbound rate is at $3.08 per mile. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, and without any further ado, let's go back and welcome our guest to the show, Mr. Jeff Hall. Jeff, if you could tell everyone what it is that you do and what your expertise. Welcome to the Racing Lanes podcast. We thank you for joining us. Good evening.
Good evening, and thanks for the invite, gentlemen.
Thanks for coming on.
I'm a private investigator, principal and partner with Transit Risk Management. We're based in Long Beach, California. Me personally, I'm based out of Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, but I travel over the country because everything that ships insured, so we can have an insurance claim on a loss anywhere in North America. Like last week, I just got back from Louisville, and I had one of my partners went up to your neck of the woods, Chuck, as we had in Ontario on a huge warehouse loss, and so we just do cargo theft all over the country. I've got a partner that does Latin America, Curtis Salisbury. He's based out of Salt Lake City, and then Sam Wadwani runs our California office, and he's a former ship captain and specializes in insurance, damage claims, and also dabbles in investigations as well. So that's kind of what we do.
But you guys must have your hands full right now, because my understanding, Jeff, is that we're right back up to pre-pandemic numbers with cargo theft.
We are. It's really, I think the numbers are probably even higher because we're not getting responses and reporting like we should. And it's nothing against law enforcement. It's just the way things are. When you have defunding, reimagining police, whatever you want to call it, that's all taken effect. Plus, you've got a lot of prosecutors that are liberal-minded that aren't real sincere on charges. So it's, the bond issues have worked against us. Getting guys to work off sentences, which provides informants, has really lacked, which you've always had that in the past. So a number of those elements have added up where, and like a lot of times we've had cases where we simply can't get a police report filed. These guys have been so busy with other duties, especially when the COVID situation was going on. They had to do COVID. I mean, they simply had to go out and make sure that social distancing was being adhered to, things like that. So they just didn't have time to file a police report. But it has gotten better, and the guys that are working the cases, we've had some tremendous efforts, especially out in California. We've had a couple of really big cases involving misdirection of freight or short shipments. And there's been a group out there that the California Highway Patrol guys have done a fantastic job building a huge case. So it's still, we're battling it, but it's more of a challenge now than it probably ever has been before.
Yeah, that's I can understand that, and they seem to, from what I'm reading, they seem to be really bold, like going into truck stops in the middle of the night and opening up doors of parked trucks. People are, there's movement all the time, and they don't seem to be cautious of it at all. What can drivers and owner operators, even companies, do to protect themselves? I'm guessing in a lot of cases, locks are for honest people.
So much of what you're talking about, Chuck, there's been a historical cargo theft group, and a lot of things I reference in California because it's the cargo theft capital of the United States. Just so much that happens out there, and with a lot of what you're talking about, there's been a historical organized crime group out there that's been operating for well over a decade, and these guys are very good. They use a lot of tradecraft. They are very brazen. We've watched a video where they'll follow a box truck from like an electronics manufacturer and right to the freight forwarder up by LAX, and they'll have like 3 chase vehicles. And as soon as the van backs up to the dock, they'll get out with safety vests on, start directing traffic, and they just assimilate into the workforce. So even if you're watching them, you think nothing about it because they look like they belong there. And so, yeah, you're right. They're very brazen. We've even had them pull right into maybe a place where freight's being picked up, and the driver goes inside to get paperwork. They'll hit them right there where they'll pull up in a nondescript van, pop a lock, and pilfer as much product as they can, then drive off. So, yeah, these guys they're professionals. They know what they're doing. They've got high trucking acumen, but they're also thieves, and they're thieves.
And I guess, unfortunately, when they get caught, nothing happens to them.
I would say nothing, but the different states. I know in Texas we worked hard with the legislature over a number of years. J.J. Copeland, who was on here a little bit earlier with you guys, a good friend and runs our Southwestern Transportation Security Council. We sent a representative down there and worked hard with the state legislator to actually get cargo theft laws that actually had teeth in them. So if you get caught, it's not just a slap on the wrist. And that's had a big impact here. Dennis McGinnis, who just retired with the Dallas Police Department, I worked with for years. We got to love these guys. And it's really, we just don't have a lot of cargo theft here locally right now, where we've usually always been the second busiest cargo theft venue in the United States. So it just depends on the location. If you've got lax laws and it's just going to be a slap on the wrist, yeah, I mean, so you catch a driver, what's that really prove? The driver's not the main bad guy usually. There's a hierarchy.
Yeah, it's and it's costing all of us. And I always feel that the trucker's getting it from everyone. He gets it from the unscrupulous lawyers. He gets it from the public. Unfortunately, he gets it from some of the shippers, and he gets it from the truck manufacturers. He's getting it from the crooks now. The truckers don't get a break.
No, and a lot of times they don't get a break. They don't get a whole lot of respect. I mean, I interview these guys every day, day in and day out, and so often I hear, well, the driver's involved. Well, a lot of times the driver is not involved. It's more often than not the driver is not involved. The driver, when you think about it, the guy, he picks up something like up in Michigan. He's got, like, say, he's got a OTC, over-the-counter load of pharmaceuticals, Band-Aids, aspirin, things like that. And he pulls into a large warehouse down here, and he's 15 minutes late for his appointment. He said, well, you got to come back tomorrow. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then he's got to try to find a truck stop, which is by appointment only. It's full. So he tries to find somewhere to bury his rig for a while. He can't do it. So finally he just says the hell with it and drops the trailer on a white space on the shoulder of a road where some other rigs or trailers and tractors are parked, puts a kingpin lock on it, drives off. Comes back next day and it's gone. Because there's a group of cargo thieves out there that are looking specifically for that MO. But the driver, is he at fault? Yeah, he probably didn't make a very wise decision, but is he correct? No, he's not correct. He's just gotten very upset. And like I said, these guys they get cut off in traffic all the time. Nobody wants to give them a break. So it's a tough job. And you're right. You're right.
It has really become it's become a much harder job, and that's why there's a shortage of drivers. So tell us something, Rick. In your opinion, what are some things that the average owner operator that's listening to this or participating in some cases can do to protect themselves from some of this stuff going on?
Well, the majority of theft would stop for one simple reason: never leave the rig unattended. That would stop it right there. But how feasible is that?
It's not.
It's like, and also the pickup times, delivery times. If a load could be picked up, let's say in SoCal, early in the morning at like 10, then they could have an evening delivery up in NoCal, and it'd be a same day delivery. And again, that would reduce theft big time. Theft when it stopped, or cargo when it stops, is when theft occurs. And some of these guys will have, shippers down here that are shipping a lot of times computers or electronics from where it's Compton or it's Carson, somewhere in Southern California, up to there's just no denying. I mean, it's not a big secret, but there's a huge Best Buy distribution center in Danuba, and it's a target. And so if the load's going up there, gets picked up here in the late afternoon at 2 o'clock, well, the guy can't make it up there in time before the offload, so they're gonna have to stop in Chino or Bloomington or Bakersfield, and it's usually they've got a yard that's a leased yard. They'll either drop the trailer or park the rig in there and then take their personal vehicle and go home, and that's when these guys break in and boost the loads.
I think that I think it maybe goes without saying the higher value loads, your electronics, your computers, things of that nature is obviously heavily targeted. Are there any other loads that these guys that run these rings seem to have a fancy for, or does it matter? Do they discriminate at all?
That's a good question, Rico. And the answer is you're right. Electronics are probably the soup of the day, but we've had them with high-end apparel, high-end fashion bags, things like anything that's going to be high dollar.
Anything they can fence, correct, Jeff?
Correct. And what's happened with this group that I was telling you about, that's been the historical group that is responsible for about, well, like I said, I know that since September of 2020, we'd had 80 such thefts. There's probably well over 100 now. They're all with the same group, same MO. There's following trailers from manufacturers. They know that a Asus is shipped from Newark up in the Silicon Valley. They know that Acer shipped out of Compton. They know that most of Dell shipped out of Torrance. They know all that. And what it gets down to, I just had this discussion right before I came on with a guy. We were talking about it, and when we've looked at all these cases, every time there's been maybe multiple trailers have been stolen from one shipper, that we always want to go in and say, okay, what's the criteria? When was it shipped? Who shipped it? What dock doors? what was the value, look at the BOLs, check what the value of each load was. And after we've done all that analysis and all these cases, it comes down that they know brand, they don't know content. They know it's a Dell, they know it's a Asus, they know it's an Apple, but they don't know content, because sometimes the load they might follow might be a load of accessories that has virtually no secondary market value.
Gotcha.
But they also get very lucky at times too, especially with what's going on now. We're seeing such an increase in really targeting gaming computers. They've got that down to a science, and that's what people and everybody usually thinks about the same thing. We had a call happened last week. A big electronics place, fellow said, "We're being targeted." And I said, "Well, what makes you think you're being targeted?" "Well, just we're being followed. We had 4 loads taken." Well, when we analyzed the loads and look at them, some of them were real valuable. And I said, "Well, I don't think you've been targeted. Why would you take all the manpower, put a guy inside, use all those resources for a load that didn't amount to much value?" And they go, "Well," I said, "Well, it's because you're not being targeted. You're being a victim of raw surveillance. These guys will pull up, they'll wait, they follow, and they take, like I said, they know your brand, but they don't know your content."
Okay, so another question would be, with all the different modern technology that's available now, with all the different tracking features that most companies have on their tractors. Not so sure about trailers, but I do know some companies have trackers on their trailers. So let's say, give you a scenario. I'm just curious. If a guy goes into a truck stop, if he comes out and if he does notice that the entire truck and trailer has been stolen, how quickly does having that modern technology, how quickly does that help maybe try to begin to the recovery process? Do you have any information on that, or do you know anything as far as that's concerned?
Sure. And I mean, it's a great help, except a lot of times these guys are very smart. They're very savvy. A lot of times they'll disable any kind of tracking device. Other times they might get an area where there's a company out there now that has multiple platforms to track, and they're very good. And a lot of my friends work for them. A lot of guys that are ex-cops have went to work for them. They're very successful, but they've even had a few cases where they can't get an accurate reading. They get a general reading, but not a definite reading of where something's at. So then you're out there, and it gets into a thing where it's our old adage: what you can prove and what you know are two different things. And we see that a lot. Like last week, I just had a case like that where I was analyzing some data, and I made a note in a report. I put it in a report to a client because I think it's something that might help us in the future. I don't think that this particular load went there, but there were 2 loads that this carrier picked up, and both of them got delayed. And one of them got delayed and then delivered short. Well, at the same time, another one ends up getting delivered about a week late, but it spent a certain amount of time in a certain part of California. Well, we pinpointed that, so it's something we're going to keep an eye on, because the whole point on a lot of these deliveries we're having a lot of cases where, just for one that started us back in around the holidays, where we had 26 shipments going from Fontana up to Danuba, and all 26 shipments were short, all 26 shipments were late. So initially the client thought it was a broker issue, so they changed brokers in midstream, but the problem continued. So all 20, didn't matter who the broker was, 26 shipments late, 26 short. So we know when they're picking these up, they're taking them somewhere down in the Inland Empire and cross-docking, and then they'll deliver short. But where they're delivering to, they've got such a volume, they can't give you a POD on the spot that's accurate because they can't process it that quick. But what the drivers, this fraud company is, they'll produce a fraudulent POD and send it to the brokers. If the broker thinks everything's fine, then 2 weeks later, when he finally gets the accurate POD that's been issued by the consignee, they're short. So these guys have got all kinds of tricks that are very, very good. And it just, with some of these things, like I said, I always tell people about cargo theft, you rarely break a cargo case on one case. It's cumulative. You'd have to take a number, about 4 or 5 cases, and go, okay, I've seen this before, and then take a little bit of evidence from each one until you can finally put the whole thing together and understand it.
So there's always a theme, though. There's always the same thread sort of thing with these characters, isn't it?
Well, it is, and they'll do a variation. I mean, years ago, probably 7 years ago, the biggest epidemic we had in cargo theft was in the load board, and that was what's called fictitious pickup, where loads would be put up on the board. And for example, you'd have a load going from West Coast to East Coast, cross country, a late week pickup, early week delivery. and mostly it'd be picked up at 3PLs, but the load board would just read, you must have $250,000 cargo liability insurance, team drivers. And so when the thieves saw that, they're like, well, that's high value load. Well, they
Right.
had what the commodity was. I mean, hell, it could have been from a 3PL that handles Polo, Interstate Batteries, and Monster Energy Drink. So they knew they were getting one of those three items. They just didn't know which one, but they didn't care because it's high value load. But we finally figured out how this was going on and did some stings, set that up, and actually eradicated that. But then they found another way to go about it. Now, a lot of times they're still involved in fictitious pickup, but they will actually get the load and then hire a legitimate driver and have him take it to an unsuspecting warehouse and just leave his trailer there. And then say, we'll come back and get your trailer in 2 days. And they do. And then he doesn't get paid, the load's gone. And so he's a lot of times the driver's getting duped. And then sometimes they even pay the driver and do this. So they get creative and change with whatever we try to figure out. And once you get it figured out, they'll change the venue on you. They'll change the MO.
So I'm curious, Jeff. I'm curious. I know you said earlier California and Texas, 1 and 2. Those are the 1 and 2 markets where a lot of this theft and everything takes place. Are there any other areas throughout the country? Like I'm curious. Like what? So if those are the top 2, what are the other? Because I'm just with the hub and spoke model of moving freight. Is majority of it just concentrated in those 2 areas, or are there any other areas throughout the country where this may be an issue where people might need to make sure that they have their guards up?
There's other areas, but there's also a lot of areas that rarely have cargo theft. Just to give an example, a historical, going from west to east, just where the cargo theft task force have always been. The state of California has always had, historically, the city of LA, which is bad cats, the county, which is cargo cats, and the state, which is California Highway Patrol, CTIP. Then as you came came east, you wouldn't have another cargo theft task force. They got Chicago, mostly because of Elk Grove Industrial Park.
Right.
And then as you continued east, you'd get a task force in Memphis, Tennessee, which they still have one that involves the FBI. Then you'd had one of the best, most active in the country was GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, with John Cannon. But John's retired, and that unit's been pretty much disbanded. And they caught a lot because a lot of the Cuban traffic and a lot of thefts occurred in Georgia. And then you've got Miami, which had the Tomcats and still have a very active cargo theft task force that's comprised of the different municipalities down in South Florida and the FBI. But having said that, yeah, we still get it's crazy because one of the areas we talk about is Chicago. They still get a considerable amount of cargo theft. You've got the Chicago Disciples, which is a gang that does a lot of cargo theft. You've got a lot of, and I'm not trying to be prejudiced here, people. Anybody can be a cargo.
It is what it is.
What it is. But there's a lot of Eastern Europeans that are very smart, have a lot of trucking acumen that are very good at fictitious pickups and redirected freight. So we've got a lot of that kind of theft up there. But currently, I don't think Chicago has one person doing cargo theft. First time ever. They used to have a very robust 6 or 7 man unit that was outstanding, but budgetary cuts and reassignments, they just don't. Memphis still has it. Memphis is always key because of where it's located. You've got so many major interstates coming through there that trucks might pick up something on the East Coast. They're coming through there. So that's always been a hotbed of theft. Plus, you've got a lot of local gang activity that's very involved in cargo theft in Memphis. And then we'd be remiss by not missing it. And you guys are probably are curious about this, but we've had a tremendous amount of railroad theft where when trains are parked, like out in LA, you probably saw the pictures a couple of months ago that were just sickening when you saw the amount of product being just taken off from train yards.
Right.
And that same thing was going on down in Memphis and other parts of the country because they just don't have the manpower. They've got special agents, but you think, well, how come they're not catching them? Well, you go to a train yard sometime at night. Look how big that train yard is and how many. You might have a couple of guys assigned there at night. They do their best. Yeah, we work those guys, and like I said, those are some of the best guys we know, but they're very limited on what their resources are. So, and the crooks know, they kind of know what routines are. So, to get to your point, Miami doesn't. Florida everybody thinks because the organized crime element down there of the the guys in Hialeah that are notorious. They're very good cargo thieves, but they usually don't steal in their own backyard. Most cargo that arrives down in Miami gets dumped there from some other part of the country. It's stolen like in Virginia and dumped down in Miami or somewhere in Florida. So not a lot of it originates out of there, but places like Kansas City, St. Louis, Indianapolis rarely get cargo theft. Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, they just aren't. A lot, when you start talking about prolific cargo theft venues, Chuck, you start talking about Mississauga. Now you're getting into serious cargo theft up there that rivals anywhere anymore.
So for listeners, that's the western suburbs of Toronto, and you have you have to understand you have a huge concentration of trucking companies, logistics companies, and warehouses, all within 10 square miles. Rick or Jeff, is there anywhere else where you have that much concentration of trucking companies like the way you do in Mississauga, Brampton?
Well, one of the areas that was starting to get that way, but we caught this up in the Pacific Northwest, cargo theft rarely ever existed. And going back probably about 7 or 8 years ago, we had a break into a Nintendo warehouse where they sold 75 pallets of Nintendo games.
Good.
It was kind of funny because a detective from King County called me about it before I ever was assigned, and just as the detective described it, it sounded to me like it was the work of the Cuban guys, because they're the only ones that every aspect of the case sounded like how they operate. And as it was right around the holidays and as time worked out, one of my clients actually got that case, so I went up and worked it. And of course, it was a group, which is the guy that was actually responsible was the most prolific cargo thief on the West Coast. He operates out of Salt Lake City, and he's got operatives that operate mostly in Southern California. And one of the trucks that was used to steal some of those loads was recovered down in Commerce, California, which told us, and the cargo theft task guys down there, the buddies of mine said, well, we know who's responsible. Well, from that, then we started getting a lot of cargo theft up in Seattle. And if you guys have ever been up there, of course, beautiful city, one of the most beautiful towns in the world, but they're just growing exponentially south. Like we look at places like Renton and Kent, and they're all warehouses going up. It's just nuts. You'll see warehouses up there with no occupants. So what they would do, they'd go up there, if they would see a trailer or a container that is sealed and the lock on it, they'd boost it, not caring what it was. And they got some really nothing loads like cheap nuts and cheap furniture. And so then they finally went for a major caper on a 4PL up there that carried a major box stores products and a couple others. And they went in and broke into the yard and marked with orange paint like 6 different tractors or containers and trailers, and they got the 6th one up on the fence, and they tried to move it out of there. So they had 5 of them that was over $1 million of the product. And
wow.
We got a lucky break on that case early on. A woman saw 5 Latino guys unloading the store's product into a storage facility, private. She goes, I didn't know they stored it overstock there. So we went out, found it, put up a pole camera, followed them, and broke those guys and got them, and got back every bit of that product, over $1 million recovery. Well, ever since then, the cargo theft has kind of stopped up in the Pacific Northwest. But pretty much, you can pretty much look at Texas. Houston gets some because a lot of times it's pipe and roofing, or anytime that you have a natural disaster in this country, like a hurricane strikes or a hailstorm, anywhere where there's products like plywood, shingles, things like that, thefts will occur. And a lot of that happens in, it could be Louisiana, it could be Texas, could be wherever, but mostly Southern California. Well, really the whole state of California, but primarily Southern California, because you got all that freight coming into the ports of Long Beach and LA, and it sits side by side in San Pedro. So once it gets offloaded, starts moving around, then stops, that's where the most of the theft happens. But still, you'll get a considerable amount of theft in Memphis. We still get somewhat here. Louisville's kind of a key because they've got some major distribution centers down there. I think they got a FedEx, the UPS, T-Mobile, and a Sprint. So those get quite a bit of attention by thieves. But outside of that, it can happen anywhere, but those are the hot spots. That's where we spend most of our time.
Now, Jeff, are there any areas as far as the truck stops where you're seeing more occurrence of theft in truck stops?
You do, and usually it's a theft of opportunity. We'll see it occasionally, but it's not as much as you might think. The last one we had here recently was a a load got followed from Louisville to Prescott, Arkansas at Love's, where the driver stopped overnight and went inside. But he'd been followed all that. It was during the ice storm. He drove there and they boosted his load. And we know who did it because the product started showing up, being activated down in Miami. So we knew who did that. But it's not as common as you think. And if it is, it's usually something that is more pilfered of less dollar value. We rarely see FTLs, full trailer loads of product, being stolen from truck stops. Happens on occasion, but it's not real prevalent.
What about the we talked earlier about talking about the on trains and stuff like that. So what about cargo containers? The containers, and are those a lot of times I'll see those, especially here around the city in Atlanta. I'll see those just parked and dropped all over the place. Is that something that that they bother to target those containers as well, or they mostly looking for just more of the high dollar stuff? That's
No.
in the
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, Rico. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. I'm just curious. Are those being targeted for activity as well?
Oh, absolutely. And then there's even, we've looked at things like when we look at it. I mean, there'd be ways if you put everything, if you could only have the lower containers, there'd be less theft. But they always usually get the top containers. But no, they definitely target them because they know that a lot of things like very valuable product, well, a lot of like Nike shoes, Adidas shoes.
Right.
Footwear like that gets shipped that way. And they know that. And the train's going to be sitting there for hours. They've got time there to have a looking out for security. And they've got guys in to go in and there's discussion now about how to make that more secure because that's become such a big area. And one of the other busiest cargo theft venues in the country is where you just mentioned. Atlanta is very, very active. Bob Hastings is a very good friend of mine that is a great private investigator. He used to work for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. He keeps very, very busy down there. We send him a lot of work. We work together a lot, but he's a great investigator. He's great because he's not afraid to stick his nose in where it doesn't belong.
Jeff,
sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get results.
But
Jeff, how did you ever get into this branch of private investigation?
It's interesting you ask that. I've been a private investigator for 40 years. I got very lucky when I went to college, Indiana State. At the time, they had one of the top 5 undergrad criminology programs in the country. So I went there and got out, and most of the professors, bless their hearts, couldn't tell you much about private investigative work, which is what I always wanted to do since a little kid. They saw you follow, women around on cheating husbands or cheating wives. And I got lucky and got into the industry since I got out and went to work for a large national company. And traditionally, back in those days, you started out doing undercover work. Like I think my first assignment was in a grocery distribution place in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Then I went to a meat house in Detroit, then to a hospital in Columbus, Ohio. Then, all over the country, just looking for theft and buying drugs. And you do that for a couple of years, and then I've never done any of the domestics. I mean, any domestic work ever. Then I got into had my own department when I was 22 and handled freight or fraud and theft investigations. And it wasn't until I did a lot of surveillance work. I mean, all over the country, a lot of work for the railroads over the years. But then about, probably going on about 15 years ago, a friend of mine one time said, I guess he had some motorcycles that got stolen and down Fort Worth, and they assigned somebody and they couldn't find it. Well, my cousin happened to be high up in that company. And he said, well, hell, I've got my cousin in there was where the hell he would find those motorcycles. So they got a call and they said, have you ever done cargo work? And said no. So I started doing some cases and had a lot of success on it. And we got to the point where that's all I do anymore, period. There's just nothing but cargo theft for the last 15 years.
Wow. Interesting business. I'm sure it takes you all over the place into all sorts of different environments.
Well, it doesn't. And one of the guys that had heard of me was my partner now, Sam Wadwane, who he's a legend in the industry. He's like the insurance encyclopedia. He knows the industry, knows the business. He's been in it for 40 years as well. And so when I first got into it, I mean, I learned a lot about the insurance aspect of it. I mean, always the investigative part, but how what we do a lot of times is our primary purpose is to serve the insurance industry because, like I said, everything that's shipped is insured. So if you can find the cargo, well, hell, you mitigate the claim. But a lot of times you can't, or you might not find the cargo till 6 months later. And then if it's a seasonal thing like Christmas sweaters and you find them in July, well, who in the hell wants them?
And their last year's, yeah.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of things too that you wouldn't think about that get stolen that we make a recovery. Mark Losi works for us. He's a retired CTIP Northern, part of the task force, and a great guy, great friend.
Right.
And Mark did a great recovery on some motorcycles, a very big brand. If I told you, you'd know them. And we recovered. We got all but one, but they had such unique packaging about them, and they hadn't been destroyed. But that company said, "Don't want them. They got to be destroyed." Even though they had this unique packaging, they couldn't get out of the truck. They just simply didn't want them because in their opinion, they've been contaminated. And we find
Wow.
that a lot in a lot of different products. Like
No, I understand that with any type of food product, if it's under the, if it's lost, if control is lost under the chain of custody, you don't know where your truckload of chicken or hamburgers went for 36 hours. Nobody wants them because nobody wants to take the liability. But you wouldn't think with a load of motorcycles that are in crates or whatever, they would be they're not going to get contaminated.
No, I agree, but it's not really our place to argue. We don't understand it, but a lot of times you kind of scratch your head, and I've seen it before where it's been something that's been like a sealed food item. That maybe like it's sealed in a metal can with shrink wrap around it. Same thing. No, they won't take the chance. And I remember I had a big case years ago where we had a load of orange juice that got stolen and it was supposed to be destroyed. Well, the driver took it upon himself to ignore it and and he just went and sold it. And I finally tracked the guy down to El Paso and did surveillance on this guy for a week. And then finally came out in the family and it had been taken across the 22 pallets. I think 16 were in this warehouse still in El Paso, but 5 went across the border. So a guy at the Salver bought 5 of them. And he goes, well, I've already sold 5. And he said, what did you sell them to? And he goes, oh, different people across the border. I said, would you take any of the juice for yourself? He said, yeah. I said, did you drink it? He goes, yeah. I said, anybody die? He said, no. I said, okay, then it must not be contaminated. But we still got the load back, and it was the 16 pallets. But if you would not have believed the pressure that was put on my client, who was a logistics company, because that orange juice is owned by a major soft drink place, and they wanted every 5 minutes, they wanted to know where that juice was at.
Sure.
Because it's Tylenol all over again. They're worried if anybody drinks that, gets sick. Liability is frightening.
Their product insurance liability, they're at stake. I get that with food. I'll never understand it with machinery or anything like that. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But you can't argue. The insurance companies are calling the shots, and the customers calling the shots.
Yeah, and I think most of them, just on that real quick, I see a lot of common sense being used. I mean, I see insurance companies working, and I work for the big ones, and they try to be very understanding about a claim. They just don't look for the simplest thing that they can deny a claim on. They don't work that way. They look at the best they can. If they've had a policyholder, it's been a customer for a lot of years that they've made a lot of revenue off of. They don't want to lose that customer. So sometimes I think they get a bad rap about being just cutthroat, and they want to drop an assured, because it's certainly not what I see. Not the large insurance companies that I work with.
I think they're like everybody else. They're trying to be profitable in and especially in their business, in a very difficult environment, and they're going to do what they can do to be profitable.
Exactly.
We don't all, as the insured, from as somebody that spends a lot of money, buying insurance, I understand that, and we always feel that with our relationship with our insurance company, it's a partnership, but not every carrier thinks that way. And, sometimes it becomes adversarial, especially when a carrier lies to the insurance company. You can't do that. You have to, if you're hauling something of great value, you have to fess up to the insurance company, because if they find out that you're hauling precious minerals and it's excluded from your policy, they'll drop you like a hot potato.
No, you're right. And I see it all the time. Like when I get a report in of a driver and his rig's been stolen. I had one down in Florida here recently, and he said, yeah, I parked in this yard and he described the yard, and I looked at it, and what it was a giant car lot that was all walled off. He didn't park there. He parked on the outside. He parked on the street near that. But he told the claims rep the opposite, and it made a big difference. I mean, when you look at where it was parked, they had all kinds of rigs parked there, tractors by themselves, trailers by themselves, and thieves that are smart cargo thieves, they're always going to go looking in those areas. They're going to look for what are they going to look for? They're going to look for a trailer that's got a seal on it, and they're
Yeah,
probably
of
going
course,
to
that's a dead
Well,
giveaway.
exactly.
I'm curious. Maybe you said something just now, and I know we've been talking about cargo theft, but with the increased price, with the price of truck and equipment, trailers and stuff like that, trailers and trucks skyrocketing here over the past year or so. Are you privileged to the numbers when it comes to that type of theft, or the actual equipment, trucks and tractors and trailers and things of that nature?
I might not have numbers for you, Rico, but I've
But
got
has it increased?
oh, definitely. I've got a specific client that does nothing but insures um, the more marginal carriers and trailers and rigs, and yeah, no doubt there's been a big increase. I mean, there's a lot of times I might get 4 or 5 cases a year where I'm saying I'm getting at least 20 to 25 cases a year now, just from that one client with a trailer stolen here, a tractor stolen there, a whole rig there, a lot of transport trailers being stolen, things like that. No
Right.
doubt, no doubt.
Well, with the
So
shortage of components, my guess is a lot of times they're stealing anything they can find, and if they don't ship it to a third world market, they're just stripping all the components out of it.
Right.
well, I think that there's another story that I heard maybe about a week ago that there's been a big, as far as like with the freight liners, they're stealing the ECMs out of the freight liners. They're trying to get the ECMs because of they're not able to get ECMs anywhere else, so they're going around, and it's been a problem with them stealing the ECMs out of trucks.
And the same thing with catalytic converters out of cars.
Yes.
That's come back big time.
Right.
Yeah.
So, from a standpoint of us, I wanted to get into a question about insurance. I know you're not an insurance guy per se, but with most of these loads and things of that nature, do they have qualifications, or do the people that you have, are they making sure that the clients have the adequate enough insurance to cover any of the product that's at risk that's being shipped and transported, or is that just kind of like put back down on the carrier? It's their responsibility to make sure that they have the insurance to cover whatever it is that they're hauling.
Rico, that's an excellent question because it's one we deal with all the time. You would not believe how many times I get a theft and I go out to a carrier and they said, we had no idea what we were picking up. We were never told. We were never advised by the broker. We only got $100,000 of cargo liability insurance. This load was $750,000. He said, hell, we would never, ever have uplifted that load had we known that was the value of it. And I think that what's the result of that has been because of the shortages in truckers, the shortages of drivers. There's so many places that they've got to move freight and they've got such shortages that there's a lot of shortcuts have been taken where a lot of the times the carriers aren't properly vetted and that question is never asked. And then once the theft happens, you get a lot of this, all kinds of
Right.
figure of who's responsible. And
So what happens? So you have a carrier picks up the $750,000 worth of cargo. He has $100,000 worth of cargo insurance. He gets the load from a load broker. There's a shortfall of $650,000, the value of the cargo that's missing. Who's covering that? Is it marked on the bill of lading what the value is, or how does the carrier know that what the value of the freight is? Unless it's going across the border, the carrier has no idea. He's picked up a load of electronic widget components.
Well, just like you said, a lot of times the terms are defined on the back of the bill of lading, but a lot of times that's not reviewed. But with a lot of this, that's where you get into some of these cases, which happens. Like we report exactly what we know about what the coverage was, and then once it gets turned over, that's where the insurance company, gets involved in subrogation, gets an attorney involved, and I've had cases where I've had to go testify, where there's been a lot of times it's misunderstanding because, for example, when the fictitious pickup loads were going on, there was a lot of lawsuits ensued on that because they're like, well, you're the broker, you gave to this guy, but he's a crook. And they go, yeah, we didn't know that. He had legitimate ID and the proper shipping documents when he picked up the consignment. And then so a lot of times I'd be asked, I said, well, Mr. Hall, what do you think about this in this particular case? And I said, well, it was a carrier. It was the first time that they'd ever used this carrier. And then to me, that should have been a red flag. Oh, so you're saying that the first time carrier should never be assigned to a load. Well, that's what an attorney tries to say, but common sense dictates to you, if you've got a high dollar value load and it's the first time a carrier's ever picked it up, don't you think you'd go to extra lengths to vet that guy and make sure every single document he gives you is appropriate? So, they want to twist things around on that, but there are certain red flags when you're vetting a carrier that you look for.
I totally agree. I think in this market, there's been a lot, like in the brokerage industry, I think there's been a lot of inexperience, people brokering loads throughout the industry, especially with some of the smaller brokers that haven't made the investment. And even there are a couple large ones that should have known better, and they didn't spend the time or the money in training because of their turnover. And then you have the desperation from some of the smaller brokers to move freight in a difficult, definitely a difficult market. So it's a bad combination, and I think that's where the lack of expertise on all ends, that's created some of this.
Oh, you're spot on.
I had to get up and go run and grab my book from our other resident legal expert, Rules of the Road by Hank Seaton. He talks, for people that haven't seen, this is a pretty significant book. It used to be a little bitty old pamphlet book that he initially came out with, but he redid this one on second edition. And I think that, like I said before, when we had Hank on, it's worth having one copy in your home office, one copy in the truck. Talks significantly about cargo claims and things of that nature, to make sure that you are, what I say, cover your ass with both hands. See what?
Yeah, it's true. You know what? Because we have seen several times through the years, new carriers and smaller carriers just starting out get wiped out by one cargo claim.
Sure,
absolutely. So, I'm looking at the time. I know we started a little bit late, but I wanted to try to going over just a little bit, but some practical things that, Jeff, that you might be able to leave us with that can help our listeners and some guys understand and know things that they can do to kind of, what they say, an ounce worth of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Can we give some preventative measures to help some guys and people out that and keep folks from having to have anyone call your office and investigate them?
Yeah, we like you, Rick, Jeff, but we don't want to have to call you.
No, I understand that, and I think that, obviously the best way is if just don't leave a load unattended. That's paramount. You won't have a theft if you don't. I mean, it'd be very rare you'd have a theft if that occurs. The other thing, drivers need to understand, this is one thing I'll say about drivers, because I have a lot of respect for them, but they don't, what varies from driver to driver is what constitutes a secured yard. And a lot of guys, I'll talk to guys all the time, go, why, I did this secured yard. And I'll go out there and I go, you consider this a secured yard? And they go, yeah. I said, well, I drove right in. Nobody stopped me. There's no security here. Well, and if somebody comes in the night, I said, what about the gate? Well, last guy out closes it. Okay. Is that always the case? Nah, sometimes, and then when you start really getting into the nitty gritty, it's not a secured yard. I mean, there's a definition of a secured yard: guarded, gated, lighted, right, and sign out procedures. If you have all those things, you'll rarely have a theft. But some of these guys, and in a lot of places, they'll have to sign a waiver saying I'm not responsible. So they just want to find a place they can get off the street. It's got plenty of room. They can park the personal vehicle there. And then they say, well, it's got video. Well, yeah, but is the video, how operational is it? How good is it? What's it catch? Yeah. So a lot of that goes on the driver. Really find what's called, and meets the criteria of a secured yard. I mean, one of the best in the industry, when you look at it, for years, Swift never has a theft. Never. You know why? Because their yard's like a Fort Knox. And always laugh when people say, well, but security there is a pain in the ass. I got news for you. It should be. It's
Right.
just like these school shootings. Security needs to be a pain in the ass. It
Yeah.
needs to be difficult. That's the whole idea of security. So I
Right.
kind of when people talk about that, but no, the yards need to be secured, and a lot of this theft would stop if they just if every yard if they understood what a secured yard is. I mean, just
Well,
being hidden isn't good enough.
let me
Just
jump. I want to just hold your point. While you're on this one, I want to interrupt you for just a second because I think this is a major thing that small guys such as myself have to contend with when we have, when you got guys that's one truck or one truck or 1 to 5 trucks. They may not have a big yard or in the budget, so they may. Where I park my truck at is supposed to be quote unquote, like you say, a secured yard, but I'll give you the scenario. It's automated gate. You have a punch code, digital code, or whatever to get into the automated gate, in and out. But then you'll have some people that, some other people that are down there. They'll put a piece of duct tape on the sensor to keep the gate from closing back or whatever. And you run into those situations. And if someone there's over 200 trucks down there parking and using that yard. If someone comes in and steals the entire unit or tractor or trailer or whatever else, I would assume that probably falls back on the particular carrier because that probably wouldn't fit the definition of secured lot.
Correct. And then most people that are smart enough to provide space are going to make you sign a document or sign something that says we're not responsible for any loss here. It's like parking at a hotel overnight with your personal car.
Right.
No responsibility. And most of the drivers, and also both you guys know this. You guys are very knowledgeable trucking people. How many cargo thefts occur throughout the country? And when you start adding up the dollars, it seems like a lot. But out of all the trucks that are out there, how many of them really get stolen? It's a very, very small amount. So a driver, usually when I come across a driver, they're usually shocked. They're like, they're in disbelief. Well, I know I parked my truck here. Where in the hell is it? They'll walk around and, man, did I park it over there? Because it just has not happened to them. I'll find some that they've been the victim of multiple thefts, but it's very rare. Usually it's the first time, and like Chuck said a while ago, it can be devastating. If your rig isn't recovered for a while, that's your only means of income, and you've got a mortgage to pay, you've got a note on that tractor and trailer to pay, it can devastate you financially. That's why, I guess this industry, I've always been so drawn to it just because of I just hate a thief. I mean, a thief never thinks about what they do, how it affects other people. And it's just total selfishness. It's all greed. And
Absolutely.
it can destroy lives.
Yeah, they really do. They create havoc right throughout. You look at somebody that goes and steals a load of components of some sort, whatever they are, truck components or whatever. That means that honest people that run trucks can't get their parts, and they all end up on the black market.
That's right. Yeah, and there's so much that so many different types of thefts that we come across. I mean, we see it with used goods, we see it with new goods, any kind of an angle where a person can make a buck by being dishonest. We've had a number of different fraud cases where an individual might have filed 5 different claims with the same insurance company. Well, they might have got lucky and they had 5 different claims reps handle each of the 5 claims. Well, then when the 5th one comes, maybe the supervisor goes, well, wait a minute. We've already had 5 claims with these people. They start looking, and then I had one down in Florida that was this way, and it was gaming machines. And the guy, he's the nicest guy could ever be. But when I went down to Florida and met with him, he was using the same pictures on all 5 different claims. But the other reps had never compared notes. So you get like 80,000 for this one, 40,000 for that one, 60,000. And then finally, when I confronted him about it, he started telling me a lie, and I just told him, I said, this sounds like there's some malfeasance going on here. I'll come back tomorrow I said, Deputy Sheriff's a good friend of mine. We'll come back and talk to you. Oh, wait a minute. Because we don't need to bring the law enforcement here. I said, oh, yeah, we do. There's definitely some issues here. So that night I went out to dinner with my brother and his wife down in Florida. And my client called me from Chicago at 11 o'clock. She goes, man, I don't know what you did to that guy. But man, he said, you're a hero. I said, why? What happened? She goes, that guy called me in the middle of the night and canceled his entire claim. I said, well, you're a problem. So it happens. It's just confronting people. They get by with something for a long time, but we have that. You don't believe how many times that scenario reoccurs in the insurance industry.
Oh yeah, no, I have I have heard of this where they're thieves until they're about to get caught, and then all of a sudden they turn honest.
Yeah,
They have
exactly.
that come to Jesus moment.
Exactly. Well, let me ask you guys a quick question.
Go ahead.
How much longer, or how high can fuel diesel prices get before it just isn't going to be feasible for a guy to drive?
You know, that's a great question because I'm hearing that there are some guys already that are turning their trucks in. They're going back to the dealers and saying, "Here, take the truck. I can't do this anymore." And I really think it depends on what you're hauling, because right now it's around in a lot of areas it's around $1 a mile just for fuel. And then you have all the other, incidentals. You've got your other expenses, your insurance, and everything else. So it's till it breaks somebody. But at the end of the day, we all need all these goods. We need food. We need clothing. Maybe we don't need to buy as much as we do, but we certainly need to feed ourselves. And the public seems to, I guess, it's still to some degree a post-COVID attitude. There seems to still be a fair bit of money out there because people are paying the inflated prices for everything. There's an outlet mall near our home, and it's about 10 miles away. And I went in there one day. There's no bargains. Like, these are not bargains. These are, a pair of shoes is $180 at an outlet mall. So this isn't cheap. It's not a pair of cheap shoes. There's no discounts. So, and the place is packed and people are carrying bags. So there still seems to be this attitude to go out and spend money. The grocery store parking lots are full, and shopping carts are full. Now, there are people out there, of course, in society that are going to food banks. And up in Canada, I don't know what it's like where you guys are in the US, but my understanding is that more and more Canadians are starting to depend on food banks because they can't make ends meet. Because our gas here, for example, and you remember, Canada is very different from the US in the fact that you really, unless you're in one of the big cities, Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver, in most smaller cities, you need to have a car because public transit is just not as plentiful as it is in a lot of American cities. So you need a car, and gas is now $8 a gallon for a Canadian gallon. So it's $2, and today it was like $2.03 where we live, a liter, and there's roughly 4 liters to a gallon. So and that of course spreads out. Everybody is adding that price of fuel, and diesel fuel is even more. It's closer to about $9 a gallon, and the truckers are passing that on to the grocer, who's passing it on to the consumer.
Yeah, that was gonna be my take on it, Jeff, is that nobody really seems to really know. I've heard different analysts say things as much as diesel fuel could possibly get as high as $9 per gallon here in the United States. And I think that there's going to be a situation similar to that cost is going to have to be passed on until there's a point where people stop buying, until the demand starts to decrease in order for the supply to come back online. And for whatever reason, I'm not sure what the from what I understand, the president went overseas and was talking to some of the guys, some of the Saudis, about increasing production. But we have to increase production here until this thing gets situated. We have to increase production in this country, and until they figure that thing out, and it's going to be, and there's no quick answer for that, because from everything that I've heard, it takes, in order for production to get ramped up, even if we're talking domestically, that's a 2-year ordeal. So get ready and start expecting to, unfortunately, and not to sound doom and gloom, but maybe it might be time to start stockpiling those freezers and things of that nature, because I think it's I'm not sure how quickly this thing is going to get any better, especially with the current global situations that's going on with Russia and Ukraine and all of that different stuff. It's just we just seem to be in the middle of a perfect storm when it comes to all of the things that are going on when it comes to the price of diesel fuel and gasoline.
Well, you know, guys, you got to think of one thing. The automotive industry knew something ahead of time because, you know, these guys don't turn on a dime as a rule. It takes them a while to retool. And for about the last 18 to 24 months, maybe even longer, they've been transitioning very quickly to electric cars. A friend of mine was telling me he was talking to a Jaguar dealer, and Jaguar, who, you know, in spite of there's some stories about the reliability of some of their products. We owned one once. It was a phenomenal car, but they probably built the best gasoline engine of anybody, and they've stopped building them. They're all electric, everything as of next year. And a lot of the OEMs are building electric cars only, or mostly electric. I saw last night there was an ad for a Chevy pickup truck that's electric. You know, so the world is going. So what did the OEMs know that we don't know? They obviously got they got some intel from somewhere.
Well, what's compiling an issue, I see it all the time because I travel so much, is that because of the COVID lockdown, people are so sick of being shut up, and now the mask requirement's been lifted. People are getting on planes, so planes are packed, hotels are packed. People are still going to drive and pay $6 a gallon just because because they're Americans and Canadians. They want to live free, and they'll pay that.
There you go. There you go.
It gives this false sense that the economy is all good and great when it's not. So that's the other issue that's going on. I'm like you. Hell, in our country, Trump had the energy policies where it would have made a big difference in what's happening in Ukraine and had a big difference here. But now we're begging the Saudis for oil again. Shit, this reminds me back in the days of 1979 when I was a senior.
Right. Bingo. Right. Yes, I remember those days very well with the oil embargo and I gotta say, I don't want to get political on this show, but Jimmy Carter signed a doctrine that back in I think around 1979 that there'd be no more refineries built in your country, and you guys have had a moratorium on them since. So you know what? I think we're starting. I think everybody's paying the price now. Maybe we're going all electric very soon. Who knows?
But what happens in that if we have a big blizzard? You could have one out in Alberta. We could have one in Wyoming, Nebraska, Texas, where you've got all these electric cars and they all run out of juice and they're stranded out in the middle of nowhere with.
Yeah.
What I mean, I wonder.
You know what? I drive diesels. And I had a friend of mine who passed during COVID, but he was a real trucking hero, amazing guy, self-made multimillionaire, and he was an early adapter, and with everything, he had disc brakes on trailers 40 years ago, and he bought 2 Teslas because he bought the first one, he liked it so much, he bought a second one, and he was a multimillionaire driving Uber in Red Deer, Alberta, not because he needed the money, because he loved driving his Tesla and he wanted people to experience a Tesla. So he was driving Uber with it. But he drove it down to Florida all the way from Red Deer, Alberta. And he said, it's funny, when you get on the highway in the US and people are traveling 75 miles an hour, you better travel with the flow of traffic or somebody's going to hit you. And you've got your defroster on, and you've got your windshield wipers on, you got your lights on, you don't go very far, and you have to recharge again.
That's right.
And my wife, who didn't want a Tesla at the time, heard this and saw how slow, if you don't put in a supercharge, these things charge. Well, she lost her desire to have a Tesla at that moment.
Well, I think that what bothers me, why can't you get the smartest people in the room, put them all together, and don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's say, hey, let's implement some electric cars. I think they're great. Hell, we'd all have them. Why would we drive a gas car if we're going to go like to a hobby where it's 20 miles there and 20 miles back? Exactly. Electric car. But I don't think we should just totally go to electric cars. incorporate some gas powered cars with them and some hybrids. But that's what bothers me. It's either got to be all or nothing, and that
I know.
drives me.
And I think, you know what, Jeff, I think you, at some point you may see, unfortunately, you may see a whole lot of electric cars parked in people's driveways or at the side of the road that don't have electricity. If you remember what happened in your state in Houston about 2-3 years ago, you had that big ice storm.
That's right.
And you didn't have any power for a while around the Houston area.
That's right.
So what happens to your electric car then? You got a gas-fired generator to create electricity.
And they're hell bent too. I think you'll start seeing electric trucks and even driverless trucks.
Right. I think that's definitely in the works. Well, gentlemen, I'm looking at the time, and we are about at that junction. Jeff, how do you if people wanted to get in contact with you, wanted to ask you a question or something, how can they get in contact with you?
Or give you business, God forbid.
It's very simple. Like I said, the name of the company is Transit Risk Management. And my telephone number is 817-233-8158. And email address is JFF at TRM, stands for Transit Risk Management. So it's Jeff at TRMUS.com. And like I said, we can easy to get in touch with it. The phone number I gave you is my phone. I have it with me all the time. And then our main office number out in California, see if I can remember it. It's 562-436-0900. That's our main number out in the Long Beach. So
all right, I'll try to link all of that to. We'll have this up on YouTube here shortly, and I'll try to put the links for all that stuff up on the YouTube channel in the description. So, Jeff, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come on board and join us. I know we had a little bit of a technical glitch there at the beginning, but we got it in, we got it figured out, and I'm grateful that we were able to have you up and on board with us. Chuck, let them.
Jeff, thanks a lot for joining us tonight. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, we're just changing our phone system as I'm talking right now. So your best way to get hold of me for the next week or two, just send me an email, chuck@traffix.com, TRAFFIX. Put your phone number in your email, and I will get back to you. And if any of you are going to be at the American Truck Historical Society Convention and Truck Show in Springfield, Illinois this weekend, I'm down there. You'll see me. I'm not exhibiting, but I'll be walking around. You'll see me with my traffic shirt on. And with that, Rico, I'll let you backer in a hole for another week.
Just a quick announcement. There's going to be a major cargo theft, and because of COVID, there hasn't been a big thing in the United States where you have like 200 people, the cream of the crop industry. But there is going to be one on the 25th or the 26th and 27th of July in Fort Worth at the BNSF headquarters. There'll be about 200 people there. There's no fees for it. Food's free. The only cost is your transportation getting here and the lodging. But it's with the Southwest Transportation Security Council, and it'll be like I said, a major 2-day cargo theft event. A lot of presenters, and then there's going to be a TAPA event in Memphis next week. But I think the registration is closed out on it. But it's going to be at the Peabody Hotel. I think it's the 14th and 15th of June. But those will be the first 2 times we've had a chance to press flesh network and see people since the COVID epidemic. So I think people are looking forward to seeing each other again. And also, you guys, thank you very much. I'm honored every time you ask me to come on. It's always a pleasure.
We're going to have you on again, Jeff. You're phenomenal to have on. A wealth of information.
Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks again. And so for my co-host, Chuck Snow, and for Jeff, I'm Rico Muhammad. This has been the Racing Lanes podcast. Hopefully you guys were able to get some value out of this tonight's podcast. Thank you for being patient with us as we're still working through some of the technical issues. You could have been anywhere else in the world, but you took a little time to hang out with us here on the Racing Lanes podcast, and we're always eternally grateful for you doing so. So until next time, same place, same time next week. God bless you. Good night. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Keep it in between the mustard and the mayonnaise, and we'll talk at you next week.
Catch on the flip-flop. God bless.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Good night.